Hey, everybody, welcome to this week's Mid-City Sermon Cast. I'm Brady Whitten, and we're continuing this week with our Encounter series, where we're going to look at different stories from the Bible and see how people had an encounter or an experience with God, and then also ask the question, how can we enter into some of those places and spaces and encounter God ourselves? So let's dive in. So last week we began a sermon series called Encounters, in which we're looking at 6 different biblical stories and seeing where people and characters in these stories encountered God. And again, I want to make sure you know that while I want us to learn these stories and think about these stories, another really important part of this series is that I'm going to offer you an opportunity to step into some of these places yourself. And my hope is that you'll have your own encounter or your own experience with God. And this series is based on a belief that I have, and it's something I've experienced in my own life, where what people really need, what you and I really need, is not just to think certain ways about God, although our thinking is important, but that what we really want, what we really need, is to experience God's presence in our lives. That's where we're going to experience the healing and the change, the peace, the purpose that we find in being people of God. So this series is for anyone who's looking to have a deeper experience and encounter with God in their lives, or someone who's seeking God's peace, presence, and purpose in their lives. And I hope that's you. So each week, I want to offer a thought and then a reminder for us. And the thought I want to offer each week is, how do we know that it's God we're experiencing? So if I always tell people, if you can kind of get a snapshot inside of my mind, there's sometimes where it's a little crazy in there. I don't know about you, but lots of different thoughts going around, lots of feelings, lots of emotions, lots of things pulling at me and tugging at me. And it can be difficult sometimes to know which of all of those thoughts and voices, which of those are of God or which of those are God. And so each week I want to offer you kind of a different way to think about that. And this week, what I want to talk about is the direction of the voice or the direction of the experience. And let me see if I can help you to understand what I mean. So in Romans 8, verse 31 and 32, Paul says this: "If God is for us, who can be against us?" And the words I really want us to focus on there are this idea that God is for us. And I'm not sure sometimes that people really realize that. There may have been a point in time in my life where I wasn't sure I realized that God is on my side. God's on my team, right? And so anytime I experience God, God is going to pull me towards or lead me towards things that are good for me, things that are helpful, things that are for my benefit. So years ago, I saw a comparison chart that somebody put together that I found very helpful when thinking about this. And this is the way it kind of thinks about it. So God's voice calms me, where the enemy's voice obsesses me, kind of gets me wound up inside. God's voice comforts me, where the enemy's voice will worry me. God's voice convicts me. There may be some things that I need to be challenged on, or things I need to be pulled off center on, where the enemy's voice condemns me. God's voice encourages me. The enemy's voice discourages me. You kind of get the idea? So God's voice is going to be a positive influence in my life. God is going to draw me towards things that are good for me. God is for me and on my side. So I want you to think about that. Now, the reminder that I want to offer us is this. I'm saying that I want to invite you to step into a place where you will experience or encounter God yourself. And I do believe, and the Christian tradition teaches, that God is present in all places and all times and all circumstances. But with that said, I can't guarantee you that you're going to have a God experience, right? We are going to explore places where God is known to show up, but I can't guarantee you that you're going to have some sort of a spiritual or mystical encounter, okay? All right, so on to today's encounter. So the encounter this week that I want to talk about comes from the book of Luke in the 24th chapter, and this is something that's a story that's known as the Walk to Emmaus. So it's a little bit of a long reading. Kind of settle in, listen to it. It's a fascinating story. Now, on that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all the things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. And one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him." Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near to the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it's almost evening and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. So this is this really great story that takes place on Easter Day in the Gospel of Luke. So it's the day that Jesus was resurrected. And we find ourselves a little later in the day, and these two disciples are walking outside of Jerusalem. And as the story goes, Jesus appears and begins to walk with them. But a really interesting part of the story is that the scriptures tell us that their eyes are kept from recognizing Jesus. So they don't know that it's him. And they're talking about all the different things that have happened over the last couple of days, probably about Jesus' death, about his being laid in the tomb. And while they're talking about those things, Jesus, but remember they don't know it's Jesus, says to them, "What are y'all talking about?" And they kind of go over the things that have happened. But you can tell in there while they're telling Jesus this stuff that there's a part of them that's still a little doubtful. They actually say, "We had hoped that he would be the one to save Israel." When Jesus hears them talking this way, he chastises them and basically says to them, "Oh, you of little faith, like, don't you believe all the things that the scriptures had said about the Messiah?" And that's when I think the most fascinating part of this story happens. One of the most fascinating parts. Jesus basically opens up the scriptures and gives them a Bible study on this road. And he shows them all the things that Moses says about the Messiah, all the things that the prophets said about the Messiah. And then they finally arrive at the village that they're going to. Jesus breaks the bread. In that moment, they finally recognize that it's him, and then he disappears. But let me ask you this. Did you catch the God encounter in this story? Now, there's actually probably a couple of them here. There's the big obvious one, right, where Jesus breaks the bread and suddenly they know it's Jesus. That's not the one I want us to focus on. I want us to focus on a little more subtle one that takes place. Actually happens long before the breaking of the bread part. And when it happens, the disciples miss it at first. It's not until they look back that they realize what's happened. Do you have a sense of what part I'm talking about? It's when Jesus is opening the scriptures and teaching them. And when they look back and they remember that, this is the way they describe it. They say, "Were not our hearts burning within us when he opened the scriptures and he taught them to us," right? So while Jesus was teaching them from the scriptures, what I want you to note is they didn't have an intellectual experience. Like they didn't say, "Oh, did you notice that new thing that he taught us about that Moses said?" Or "Did you notice that new rule that he taught us?" That's not where they were living. What they experienced while Jesus was teaching the scriptures to them was something experiential, something awakened in their hearts, something was kindled in their hearts. So when you think about the Bible, when you think about this book that Jesus was teaching from that I just read for you, how do you think of it? What do you tend to think of? Do you tend to think of it as a book of rules and regulations? A lot of people do. I've heard people say this, that the word Bible or the letters for Bible mean basic instructions before leaving Earth. That it really is just this instruction manual, right? Or maybe you think of the Bible as a history book. Like we can look back and we can read the history of the Jewish people, read the history of people like Moses, read the history of kings like David and Solomon. Or maybe you read it like a philosophy text, right? You're looking for sort of the meaning of life. You're mining it for different wisdom. What would you say best fits your understanding? Maybe a little mixture of all of those? Well, there's some truth to all of these perspectives, and I would encourage you when reading the Bible to read it from lots of different perspectives. But what I want to introduce to you today is another way of reading the scriptures that many of us aren't taught. And it's a way that we can read the scriptures as a meeting place, a place where we can encounter God's living spirit and presence. And it's a way of reading that's called Lectio Divina, or some people say Lectio Divina. And what it means is holy reading. And the best way to kind of learn this is really to just do it. And so what I want to invite you to is an experience of this holy reading. So I'm going to take you kind of through step by step and just invite you to kind of experience this with me as sort of a guided reading and prayer. If you have a home sheet with you, the instructions will be right there and you can kind of follow along. If you don't have one of those with you, I would invite you just to listen as I guide you. So the first thing you need to do in Lectio Divina is to choose a text from the scripture. Now, we're going to use a portion today from Luke 24, which is this walk to Emmaus story. So choose a text. The second thing we need to do is we need to kind of calm and center ourselves, calm our bodies. You know, our posture as we're doing these kinds of things can matter. Are your shoulders tense? You can kind of relax them, loosen them a little bit. Take a few deep breaths and just really be present to your body. Again, calm your mind. And what we're doing in reading the scriptures, we're not reading them for intellectual knowledge. We're not reading them from kind of a critical or historical perspective. And so we want to pray to God to help us to enter in the scriptures in this holy way. And so I would encourage you to pray something like this. Come, Holy Spirit, enlighten my heart and my mind to listen for your word. And then what you're going to do is you're going to read the text slowly and prayerfully. And what you're listening for is a word that God is speaking to you. And it could literally just be a word, could be a phrase or an image. And while you're doing this, it's suggested that you reread the same passage multiple times, again, listening for that word or phrase that God has for you. So I'm going to read from Luke 24. Beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the Scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if they were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it's almost evening and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed it, and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the Scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road, and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. So is there a word or a phrase that stands out to you, maybe an image? I'm going to read it one more time. And again, what is God saying to you in this passage? Beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the Scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it's almost evening and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the Scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed and has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road, and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. So while you're reading or while you're listening, when a word or a phrase strikes you, kind of stop and rest with that word. Repeat the word or the phrase to yourself. And maybe it calls up within you a situation, a memory, a feeling. But the question is, what is this word saying to you? What's it speaking to you? After that, you can pray, make that word into a prayer. What do you want to ask God or say to God in response to this word that you've heard? And really, prayer is just a conversation with God. So enter into a moment of conversation with God. And then finally, allow the word that you've heard to take root in your heart. Take it with you from this moment. Take it with you into the rest of the day or the other things that you're doing. Rest in God's presence and receive God's transforming embrace. So that's the practice of Lectio or Lectio Divina. And it can be a really powerful way, again, of not reading the Scriptures for sort of information or to read them critically, but to really enter into them and ask God to speak to your heart. Do you get the idea? So if you're listening to this sermon cast with a group, I would ask you to take a moment and share the answer to some of these questions. First of all, is Lectio a practice that you're familiar with? Is this something new to you, or is this something you've heard before? What was it like for you? Was it easy, or was it hard to listen to Scripture in this way? And if you're comfortable sharing, what was the word that you heard? And maybe share that with the people you're with. If you're listening alone, I want to make sure that you can be a part of this experience too. So feel free to email me your experience and maybe answer the questions that I just asked. I really would love to hear from you. So listen, would you like to experience God's presence more deeply in your life? I know there was a time in my life where I was deeply hungry, not just to learn about God, but to really know the reality of God in my life. I still find myself with that need and that hunger. If that describes you, I really want to encourage you to remember that what you need is not just more knowledge about God. What you want and you need are experiences of God's presence and power in your life. And now you know this. One of the places that God waits to meet you is in the Bible, in the Holy Scriptures.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Mid-City Church Sermoncast. If you'd like to find a home sheet, a resource that accompanies the sermoncast that has more questions to explore, the scriptures we use today, and more information, you can visit our website, midcity.church/sermoncast. If you'd like to support Mid-City Church by giving, please text the word GIVE to 225-307-0662. Thank you for your generosity, and we look forward to seeing you next week.